Welcome to A State of Mind. This is Julian Royce. I am feeling some renewed inspiration and excitement with this podcast, which is a good thing because I'm the one making it. Let's see here. I've got some great episodes coming up in the near future, and I was really happy to have Catherine Dalton on the previous episode. That one was really personal to me, as I shared. I met her through Chokinima Rinpoche, who's been really my main meditation teacher in a lot of ways. And something I thought about with that last episode, I shared the story of how I first met and received teachings from Chokinima Rinpoche and the tremendous impact it had on me. It literally blew my mind. It changed my meditation practice. It really deepened my experiential understanding of what the Dharma and the meditative path is all about. But one thing I didn't share is it also made me realize how different people can experience the quote-unquote same event in such different ways. And so, I was there as a student on a study abroad program in this room with other students and other people on the study abroad program. And so when we were all there together, we got these teachings, and for me it was such a transformative experience. While for other people there that I talked to later, they just, said things like, well, he was a nice old man, and it didn't really do that much for me. And so I just wanted to name that. I think it's so relevant to our world today to appreciate how different people's perspectives and experiences can be of even what seems to be the same event. And that's something that I talk about later in this podcast today. So I wanted to say that, and I thought I would read a message I got from one of you dear listeners. I won't read all of it, but I'll read some of it. It was a really sweet message. He said, "Hi Julian, I first learned about your podcast when you interviewed my friend Ori. I've since been listening to each new episode, and I've gone back and listened to older episodes." And then he says, "I listen to some podcasts with regularity, but avoid being a podcast junkie, lest I get caught up in this notion that I always need to be on some sort of self-improvement, healing, becoming a better meditator, blah, blah, blah path. However, yours, I am voracious in the chase of each new episode, which brings me back to your interviews. Many of the topics resonate with me as I navigate my path, which is always helpful. But this part is hard to articulate. There is a gentleness in your approach and a softness in your spirit of inquiry that is really quite lovely to experience. I'm very grateful for it. Thank you." So thank you so much for writing that. That was a really sweet message. And I agree, being caught up in always trying to improve ourselves or always trying to take in information, it's not so good. I know for myself, I need to not do that from time to time. And I appreciate what you say about the spirit of inquiry. I really want this podcast to be an inquiry, an exploration, an experiment. It's not about being perfect or getting it right all the time. I certainly don't. But that we can investigate, we can look into things, we can explore, we can make mistakes. That some of the best learning that ever happens is when we do make a mistake. So if you've been enjoying this podcast, please consider supporting it at patreon.com/astateofmind, and check out our website, astateofmindpodcast.com. You can send us a message. For those of you who've been listening for a while, you know that I work as a therapist, meditation teacher, and coach, sometimes consultant here in Boulder, Colorado. I have a new website for my services there called astateofmindcounseling.org, and I've got some new writing that will be up there in the near future. Today, I'm speaking with Sureya Leonara. This is actually the second time that Sureya has been on this podcast. If you want to listen to our first conversation, you can go back in time and find it. Sureya works as a holistic sex and relationship coach. And I think in her case, the word holistic is really accurate. And she does a good job talking about how, though she mainly teaches around sex and relationship stuff, it applies to all these other areas of our life. And I think that's so true. And she shares with us here how she suffered from a lot of chronic health issues. She was in a toxic relationship when she was younger, and through facing those challenges, transmuting them, transforming them, ending that relationship as difficult as it was, she was able to find her life purpose and passion and path and offer the type of work that she offers today. And she's offering listeners of this podcast a 15% discount off her upcoming course, which is called the Art of Transmutation. Discount code for that is State of Mind. You can see that in the show notes below. And one thing I really appreciated about Sureya and what she's doing in this class and in her teaching now is around how when difficult things do happen to us, it's so easy to feel like a victim. And in many ways that may be justified, that may be true. But to be able to transmute, to transform, to take our power back, and to actually have these difficult circumstances become the cause for us to deepen in ourselves, to share our gift with the world. And that's a big part of her message in this episode. So without further ado, I bring you Sureya Leonara. Today with Sureya Leonara. Am I saying that right? Leonara.
Yeah.
And this is your second time on the podcast.
It is. It's good to be back.
Yeah, thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me again, Julian.
Yeah. That's great. You survived the pandemic thus far.
Yes, we did.
And how do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sureya. I'm a holistic sex and relationship coach, and I use that title because while I work with sex and relationship, I approach it in a very holistic way because I see sex as the energy that permeates all of existence. It's our life force. It's how we were all created, how we got here in our bodies. And so it's so much bigger than just the act of sex. And I see relationship as starting with the self and branching out from there. And so beautiful. I see those two things as touching every area of our life. And so while that's sometimes a focus with my clients, the work is very holistic and multifaceted and reaches beyond what most people might think of when they think of sex and relationship.
Yeah, I like how you talk about it on the holistic, like that it can... All these things are so interpenetrating, interconnected.
They are. And any issue that we're having in the bedroom is not something that can be isolated as something that happens between the sheets behind closed doors. It's always connected to something else within ourselves, within our relationship with our lover. And so we're always looking at it from a holistic perspective. Yeah.
I think that there's like, I almost think about it like different doorways or windows in. And it just seems like there's any number of things that you could work with that is going to affect everything. Like that's saying the way you do one thing is the way you do everything, that kind of attitude. And I really, I've worked with people who are somatic therapists. They're all about the body, and I respect that a lot. And one of my meditation teachers, Reggie Ray, was like basically obsessed with the body. So everything was with the body. And then other meditation teachers or therapists or teachers or people, like, they have different ways of talking about things, but it doesn't mean that they're in contradiction or...
Absolutely.
That's kind of the framework, I'm trying to have this bigger perspective that integrates all these different pieces.
Yeah, that's very much the framework I work with, is that most things are a both and rather than an either or kind of situation. And working with the non-dual perspective and the embodied immanent approach as well as the transcendent approach, and how they can actually work together and with each other, and two sides of the same coin. All the opposites are two sides of the same coin. Yeah. I think it's really helpful to work at it through the different doorways and not kind of cast things aside or over-obsess on one doorway.
Yeah, that's good too.
Yeah.
And so how did you get started with all this?
I got very chronically ill in my early 20s. And with that, I lost my libido. I was having pain during sex. I was really sick, and I really lost my zest for life, and that was kind of my first clue into how sexuality and vitality were connected. And I started just diving into the realms of tantric and Taoist sexuality to kind of work with my own sexual healing. And that was really huge in working through my own traumas, the places where my own energy was blocked, and working with my sexual energy in a more conscious, intentional way. But then through that, I got introduced to the whole of Tantra and Taoism, and both of those were really helpful in expanding my perspective on what I was going through, and really seeing illness as an initiation into my passion, my purpose. It became my life's work. And I started to see that these things that were happening to me were really happening for me in a lot of ways. Like it felt like it was ruining my life at one point, and I was really deeply entrenched in victim mentality around it. And then I kind of came to see that actually it was immersing me more fully into life rather than ruining my life. So it was a big perspective shift that was a catalyst to a deeper sense of empowerment and choice, and recognizing that this was an opportunity for me to come more fully into myself.
That's beautiful. It's kind of like a chronic sickness or fatigue or...
Yeah, it was a blend of Lyme's disease, Babesia, which is a co-infection. It's a blood parasite relative of malaria. It had black mold toxicity, Epstein-Barr virus.
Oh, wow.
So, it created like chronic fatigue, inflammation, severe mood swings, depression, all kinds of other symptoms. And it was just kind of a mess. And,
Lyme disease is gnarly. I've known some people struggled with that for years or decades.
It's not fun. And it didn't, this whole process didn't make that go away. It didn't heal the illness, but it really changed how I related with it. And that was really big, because being in the victim mentality, it was keeping me in this box where there was a part of me that wanted sympathy and care and these sort of things. And of course, anyone deserves care, and it sucks to be sick. But there's almost a cheap energy that can come from getting sympathy. There's almost something that the unconscious likes about that it feeds off of. And I realized I had to let go of that identity and that story I was telling myself in order to heal and move forward. And so
we were talking a little bit about that before we started recording, the kind of victim mentality and that. I mean, it's a big subject, but what was it in you that had you see that and want to move beyond that?
It was kind of realizing if I'm latching on to this, it's taking up space. It's taking over my ability to write my own story and my ability to transmute and alchemize this experience into growth and empowerment. I couldn't stay in the victim mentality and move forward in an empowered way. And I think victim mentality is really interesting because it's not about denying that you're a victim of something. And I think that's a really important distinction. I think sometimes when people get too on the transcendent tip, it can be oh, there's no victims, everything's, your fault, your responsibility, da-da-da-da-da. But I do think that recognizing when you've been victimized and allowing yourself to get angry, to feel the pain, to go through your emotional process is necessary before you can transmute it. Otherwise, you're kind of spiritually bypassing and trying to cover it up and jump to transcending it rather than going through the human experience of it first, if that makes sense.
Totally. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think this is a good point to drill down on and talk about, because I think it's subtle, and I don't know, I don't have all the answers, but there's definitely a lot of power in taking responsibility for what you can take responsibility for. It reminds me of the old serenity prayer. That's so big in working with addicts and addiction, but it applies to everything. But
it's a good one.
Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the wisdom to change the things I can. Or the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yes.
And I think that helps me to get out of the victim mentality or the poor me kind of mentality.
Yes.
Take responsibility for what I can, but also recognize that I didn't choose what the weather is today, for example. I didn't choose consciously what color my eyes would be before I was born.
Right.
There's a billion things
that
we don't have choice around, but there are some things that we can make choice around.
That's exactly it. It's having the wisdom to know where you do have choice and how you can respond to the things that you don't have choice over. And I think that's where a lot of people get lost, is they start to forget that they do have choice, even in these ways that feel more subtle. It can be really easy to blame other people or other circumstances for our problems.
Yeah.
And when we blame and shame, we kind of shift the responsibility elsewhere and give our power away to whatever that person or circumstance is. And so, and it doesn't mean that if somebody violated us, it doesn't mean saying that what they did is okay or taking responsibility for what they did, but it's taking responsibility for what can I do from here to heal and stop giving this my power once I've allowed myself to go through the intense emotional process around it.
Right. Once you've allowed yourself to go through the process around it. Because something that I see in working with people is someone has experienced the trauma in the past and they dismissed it, or they tried to move on, and they didn't actually allow themselves to feel it and process it, and that can involve feeling a lot of anger
Yeah.
For good reason. It could involve all kinds of emotions, but to allow that to come up and really feel it and let it be released in your nervous system.
Absolutely.
It's so important and powerful and not easy.
It's not easy, yeah. It takes a lot of getting really intimate with what's uncomfortable. And letting it move. It has to move, otherwise it's going to stagnate, it's going to get repressed, it's going to explode or self-implode. And I think that feeling it part is so necessary, and that can take a long time. So sometimes getting stuck in the victim story is part of it, and we have to let ourselves go through all the layers of the process, and we can't just say like, "Oh, get over it," everything's one. Jump to the transcendent perspective. We have to go through the embodied experience first, and anger can be an incredible fuel, an incredible catalyst for creating change in our lives if we know how to channel it.
Yeah, that's a good, to channel the energy of anger.
Absolutely.
It's huge.
Hugely energizing.
Yeah. I kind of want to try to flesh this out, because my own thoughts around it aren't like 100% perfect, whatever that would mean, but something around this, things happen, right? And I've heard some really brilliant, neuroscientists and philosophers, like Sam Harris is probably the most famous, talk about how this idea of freedom, like having free will, is an illusion. And he does a great job of talking about that. Like he ties it into like there not being like a single solid self that would make the choice. So that, this, in any case, like the kind of normal sense we have of like free will, like you go to a restaurant, you can order anything you want, like no one's putting a gun to your head.
Right.
But then if you like look at all the reasons and conditions of why you want the things you think you want, go down that rabbit hole.
The whole causality rabbit hole.
Yeah, like maybe your mom always made meatloaf when you're growing up, and then at the restaurant you see it on the menu, so then you're ordering it. But there's all these reasons why you did that.
Right.
And so I think to go back to that, like it's a both and. Like that there isn't a solid, totally independent, separate self. Like that's a kind of illusion that has the illusion also that it gets to choose everything. It could also have the illusion that it's responsible for everything. To be able to take responsibility without it becoming an ego trip is basically what I'm trying to say. Totally.
And I think that's really important to recognize what's yours to take responsibility for and what's not. And I think like some people will say, you're responsible for everything that happens in your life. I don't agree with that. I think, there's tons of things that are just going to happen in your life. But I think where the responsibility lies is like, how do you respond to it? And of course, you're going to have your conditioning, your exposure to different ideas that influence that. But ultimately, I do think we get to choose, like, where do I want to go with this? And I think for a long time, I was in the illusion that I didn't have a choice over it. And it's like, I don't have a choice as to whether this illness is here or not, but I have a choice as to how I want to engage it. What do I want my relationship to be with it?
Beautiful, yeah. Also, like ultimately the meaning that you give it.
Exactly. For me, it's such a great teacher of pacing myself, and I'm still really learning that lesson. I am so passionate and inspired and ambitious.
You're a hard worker.
I'm a really hard worker, and I care so much about what I'm trying to bring forth into the world, and I'm so driven by purpose, and that can get ahead of my body sometimes. And I kind of think that this serves as a way to kind of help me stay in the body. And I'm very much a body person. Like I love dance and movement and this sort of thing. But sometimes I think like my trajectories of what I'm trying to do can get ahead of where the body's at, and having to humble out to that and listen to the body. It's something that helps me maintain balance and stay grounded in what I'm doing. And so sometimes it's very frustrating, but I also see that it's a gift.
Right. To slow down and to, pay attention to our body and not try to get ahead.
And the other purpose I think it serves really beautifully is like when this illness came on, I was in a very toxic relationship that felt very parasitic. And I kind of perceived, it felt to me like I almost physically manifested these parasitic beings in my body while being in this parasitic dynamic. And that relationship taught me a lot about self-responsibility. Because I was very in victimhood in that. Actually, I was very in... Are you familiar with the drama triangle of victim, rescuer, and persecutor? The guy's name is escaping me. Do you remember his name? Steve
Oh,
something?
I'm not sure.
I don't remember either.
In the context of therapy, especially couples counseling.
Uh-huh.
That could be a big one.
It's so helpful. It's so helpful. And so I was stuck in all three of those roles in this relationship, just constantly shifting between them. And yeah, I was very much in this place of poor me. My boyfriend is such an asshole, and every time he like cheated on me or lied to me or manipulated me. I mean, it was a very ugly relationship, but like I was constantly blaming him for it and expecting him to change. And something really awful happened at one point. Things really came to a head. And while I was spinning out in this black hole of victimhood, a very wise old friend of mine, new friend at the time, old friend now, said, "You're responsible for what's happening in your life right now." And I was pissed. I was like, so offended. I was like, "What did you just say to me?" I couldn't believe it. I was like, "The nerve of you." And I sat with it for a long time, and I came to realize I'm the one choosing to stay in this relationship. This is continuing to happen in my life because I'm consenting to being in this relationship. And, I went through this whole process of feeling like it was my responsibility to keep him intact, and that if I left, he was going to be a mess. But the truth was I was a mess because I was staying in it, and I needed to take care of myself, and he needed to take care of himself. And leaving that relationship was a huge point of stepping into my self-worth, my sense of self-responsibility, and being more discerning about what type of relationships I was getting in. But I got, the illness had started while I was with him, and it got a lot worse after I got out of it. And I really feel like one of the things that journey with illness has taught me is to listen to my body very carefully. How do my interactions with people feel? Do they feel draining? Do I feel like my boundaries get pushed? Do I feel like I'm leaking energy by kind of unconsciously consenting to dynamics that don't actually feel good to me, but there's a way that I'm almost like allowing that dynamic in without realizing it.
Or even like moving towards it, right? Being attracted to that.
Yeah, and I think that can play out in a lot of ways. Like, one of the ways I saw was when I was much younger, I felt very vulnerable out in the world, and I would always get all this unwanted male attention. And I came to realize there was actually an unconscious part of me that liked the attention. I had low self-worth. There was something that was validating about it. So
that's brave of you to see that and then admit it and name it here.
It was a big one. And so it was like, while I was consciously like, ew, I don't want this. This feels icky. This is overwhelming. I don't feel in my power. I have poor boundaries. Unconsciously, there's the part of me feeding on it because it felt validating in some way. So when I saw that, and I could see where those energy leaks were and where I was actually giving my power away, it was like I could seal up my field and run my energy in a very different way. And now it is very, very rare that I attract that kind of energy because I'm not available for it, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And use the word parasitic. I was struck by that I think that's true. I think like some relationships are draining. And it's good to notice that and actually protect yourself. Like I don't think it's helping either person. I see it a lot in my work as a therapist. And a related thing is just that sometimes ending a relationship or having a boundary is like the most compassionate, best thing ever for everyone involved. And yet the people in it can feel so like that would be the worst thing ever. Or I think there's a lot of societal conditioning around us that actually doesn't serve us. It doesn't help. It's like, it's not a failure to be in a relationship and then decide to end it or change it. Yeah.
I think that's so true. The idea that it's a failure, and then a lot of the kind of new age spiritual programming around unconditional love. And I think like you can absolutely love somebody unconditionally and draw a boundary with them.
Yes.
And that boundary can even be like, you're not in my life anymore. And I love you unconditionally, and I recognize that this is the only way I can love you is through having you not in my life because this is toxic. It's not working between us. And there's, of course there's things we can do to work through it with somebody, but sometimes it comes to a point where it's just like, no, we need to go our separate ways. And that's what I realized in that relationship, was that the most loving thing I could do was let him go, because I was enabling him. I was the crutch for his addictions, and I had to step away. And, it was messy, but
now you look back and you're grateful that you did that.
Exactly. And I'm so grateful to what I learned from that relationship. It really shaped me in a big way, as ugly and painful as it was for the 2.5 years I was in it.
It's such a big topic. I think it's good that we're talking about it, fleshing it out. Like, I appreciate you sharing your personal story because it's powerful. I think, you know, it's like there's patterns there that show up. Like, a lot of people listening probably relate. Like, being in a relationship where there's a component of addiction for one of the people that is then abusive and codependent and feels draining, and that I think that some people who are more in the caretaker role, who they're like, oh, I'm not the addict, they're the addict. But they're addicted to the drama, the relationship, the attention, the savior thing that you're talking about. So like the addiction is like running throughout the relationship, actually.
Absolutely.
Like that kind of energy. You can feel it if you're really honest with yourself. I think you can know the difference. Like, you don't need, like, I think it's hard for some people to imagine being in a relationship that doesn't have those kinds of components because it's all they've ever known.
Exactly, and some people can start to think it's boring and unconsciously try to kick some drama up.
Right.
If that's not happening.
Well, I think sometimes it's like, if they really loved me, then there would be drama happening. Like, it gets tied into that somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of confusion around what love in a healthy relationship is. And I think that drama triangle is so deeply rooted in our childhoods and our relationships with our family, and then we take it into our relationships.
I guess on the subject, I'm a proponent of people taking time to themselves. Like, that we need to learn how to be with on our own, like be alone, be with ourselves, like love ourselves, have a healthy relationship with ourselves. Like you said at the beginning, the relationship starting here, and then going out. And I'm really starting to like feel that. I feel there's a lot there.
Yeah, we were talking about that before recording too, and I think that's such a huge one. Like, to come to know ourselves. You know, we learn a lot about ourselves through the reflection of other, but we also learn a lot about ourselves just in our own space, really feeling our own energy, our own skin. I think there's something really incredible that you learn living alone, and also different things you learn about living in community. Yeah. It's
good to honor both.
It is. It's really great, and I've come to love my alone time through the course of my life, and I used to be terrified of being alone, and now I really enjoy it. Now I need a little bit of help, like getting out of the house sometimes and being a little more social because I love my alone time so much. But there's a lot you can learn about.
It makes me think of I've lived in like a number of different community houses, and before I was a therapist, I did coaching with like a lot of young adults and like younger people, and like everyone always complains about the dishes, right? Like, if you live with someone, there's always something like that.
Always something.
Taking the trash out of the dishes, but like, I started asking people when they would like be complaining about stuff like that, like the people they live with, like, have you ever lived alone? And a lot of people haven't really. But if you, or they're with their family, their mom's like cleaning up after them, and then they live with other people, and then they expect the other people to clean up after them or whatever. But if you actually live alone, then you see the mess you make because you're the only one there.
Exactly.
And so if you can live alone and keep a clean house, like, that's an accomplishment, I think.
It is.
I don't know how many people are capable of doing that.
You get to see really what's yours and what somebody else's.
Yeah. It can become more clear.
Yeah.
But, it's not to say that you have to do that or something, but I think it's valuable. Yeah. In my ideal world, that would be more of like a progression or something.
Totally.
At least before something like marriage and having a family, like, why don't you like take some time to yourself? Totally. You pass all this stuff on to your kids.
Yeah, absolutely. The solo journey can be very illuminating around things we didn't see previously. And I think it does go both ways. If you've always lived alone and then you start living in community, there's a whole other challenge there.
That's the other side of it.
Yeah.
Well, so you're launching a new course, right? Do you want to share about that a little bit?
So it's called The Art of Transmutation, and actually a lot of what we've talked about today feeds into it really well.
Nice.
Basically, it is a 4-week live online journey into the heart of sovereignty and truth and radical self-responsibility, and really learning how to alchemize lead into gold, how to take kind of the shit that life throws at us and really transmute it into medicine and growth and opportunity. So kind of what I was talking about, like with that relationship and the illness I went through, those were huge catalysts for me becoming who I am today. And those were some of my deepest initiations into transmutation, into like, okay, here's some really yucky, uncomfortable thing I'm dealing with. How can I turn this into a huge launching pad for growth and step more fully into myself? And So that's a big piece of what this course is about, and looking through the lens of non-duality, because I find that to be so helpful coming into that place of self-responsibility and sovereignty. Because again, if we keep blaming the outside for what's happening to us, it's really hard to create a different life, to rewrite the story. So,
I love that. Mm-hmm. A lot of like really powerful topics.
Yeah, and it's also about really coming into our own sovereign truth, and I think that's a really big topic right now, what that means for different people. But, we all have programming, conditioning, trauma. We're all exposed to like media, propaganda, family, belief systems, religion. Right. And so to find our own sovereign truth, kind of peeling back all of those false layers of self, all the things that have kind of gotten piled on top of us through the course of our life, can be really hard to get underneath all of that and hear our unique sovereign song that exists underneath. And so that's a big part of what we're working with too. Embodied practices around how to come home to that and know what is your truth, why are you doing something that you're doing, and can you stand in that truth in an unwavering way without being swayed by people judging you or trying to cancel you, or fear of ostracization. I think that's big topics right now, and I think there's something very powerful about being able to be unapologetically yourself.
Yes, I love that. Be authentic.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It takes a lot of inner work and process to actually get clear of what's true for you.
It does.
You can't take it for granted. It's not something that's just obvious or just given.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate that over time.
You have to get really honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And look at like, where does this come from? Why do I hold on to this? What does this mean to me? Who would I be if I knew nobody was going to judge me for anything? If I could be accepted no matter what I did, what might I be doing with my life? What might I say in this situation? I think it's a big one. As humans, we have a very like root chakra fear of being ostracized, and we didn't survive back in the day.
Right, I was gonna say we needed our group, our tribe to physically survive. Yeah, I think it's good to recognize that for hundreds of thousands of years, like being kicked out of a group basically meant death.
Yeah.
And so, still modern humans, like, we're not physically gonna die, but it's one of the most difficult things that could happen mentally, psychologically. It can have huge physical repercussions too, to be in a group and to be kicked out of it. Like, for example, I'm working with someone who was in a religious cult that they grew up with, and their parents and family and everyone is there, and at some point they got in trouble, they drank some alcohol or something, and eventually they were kicked out of this group. And not just out of the religious group, but their whole family ostracized them.
Wow.
And so it's just incredibly tough to have to deal with that.
It is. It's a super painful thing to go through. Even though we won't physically die from it now, it's still excruciating.
Yeah.
And it can be really hard to have the courage to live what that truth is.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does. It takes a lot of work and just getting clear and what your priorities are. But I think I work with a lot of people. Something that I work on with almost all my clients is, people pleasing.
Almost all your clients? That's
right now, it is very, very, very common amongst my clients. And people that have gotten themselves into relationships based on foundations of people pleasing and trying to be who they think their partner wants them to be. And maybe they've gotten so deep into this relationship now and they've realized they've both been sacrificing their truth for so long, telling the other one what they want to hear, that now neither of them feels like they can be authentic without hurting each other or without destroying the relationship. And so that's a very interesting topic too, because I think people think that people pleasing comes from a place of love, but to me it comes from a place of fear. It's a fear of confrontation, of hurting someone's feelings, of losing love. And so they do it because they want to please the other person, but eventually it leads to pain and dishonesty because neither person is being authentic.
And hopefully it leads to change and growth, but it could be painful.
Yeah.
I think people do that in a lot of ways. Like, you could do that with your career.
Yep. Your family.
Family, yeah.
Yeah. And I used to struggle with it a lot. I mean, I was raised in the Midwest, to be very like polite, pleasing, and appeasing. I was so shy as a kid. I mean, my mom, I was just visiting my family this past weekend for the first time in 7 years. My mom pulls out this little picture of me and she says to the dinner table, you know, this is pretty crazy. You all know what she does for a living, right? Now look at this picture of her at her own birthday party when she was 5 years old. And I'm just like hunched over, so shy at my own birthday party. And that was, you know, that took a lot to come out of. I used to be terrified of boys and men when I was little, and now I've specialized in working with men for a long time. And so
because of the transmutation theme of like taking the thing that is maybe the most difficult and transforming into your gift. Exactly. Because what you're doing now takes a lot of bravery.
Totally.
You're talking about really sensitive topics. And if we took a lot of what you said and applied it to the political realm, it gets really crazy, right? Like you mentioned being canceled. Like that's the reality that we're living in, where like, you know, people are afraid to speak their mind for good reasons because there's these online mobs that maybe half of them are even like robots or whatever. I don't know.
Right.
They're coming to get you.
It's pretty crazy, I know. And it's, there's been a lot of initiations into speaking to these kinds of topics and, you know, just speaking very directly and openly about sexuality on the internet. And, you know, my family all follows me on Facebook and whatever. And so to just move past whatever, you know, not caring about what anybody thinks about that. It's definitely been a journey of transmutation to go from that girl who was shy at her own birthday party to now, you know, speaking of these topics so publicly. So I think anyone is capable of it, that oftentimes our biggest weaknesses or our challenges are actually just pathways to our greatest gifts.
I love that. It's such a great message. I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think it's true. It's the hero's journey.
Absolutely.
It's like there's something in you that's calling you, and you don't want to look at it and try to avoid it and run away from it. And you know that it's the thing.
I think that's the biggest thing about this work is like getting real comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like being able to lean into that discomfort and ask what's here for me to work with.
So it sounds like your family though has accepted you. They're not.
I mean, I don't think they love it. You know, it's I'm sure they get triggered by stuff I say all the time. But again, like the way that I run my energy with them now is very different. Like I'm not going to entertain them complaining about me. It's not something I'm interested in holding space for. If you know, if we have like an interpersonal conflict and we need to work through that, sure, that's different than like them complaining about me and my lifestyle and you know how I live or what I do for work or whatever. I mean, my dad, you know, he's conservative and Catholic, and I think it makes him really uncomfortable that I work in the realm of sexuality, and he doesn't really want to talk about it, but he's proud of me, and you know, what I've learned so much, and what we're working on in this course too, is can you still be in relationship with people that are very different than you, rather than feeling like you need to go into people pleasing or avoidance or get into arguments. You know,
that's a great thing to teach and share.
It's key right now.
Yeah, we need that.
We do. I mean, I have people that I love very dearly who see the world very differently than me, and I think it's so important that we can still connect as humans without that needing to be something that, you know, makes us hate each other or view each other as lesser than. And I'm so different than my family, and we do well together now, and it took a long time to get there, but it's you know, it's just the journey, and it feels good to be able to keep people in your life even if they don't agree with you.
It's that idea about having good boundaries is part of what you're talking about, which has a real energetic component to it, right? Like you're not like leaking energy, where you're getting hooked, where your emotions are coming in. I got to spend some time with some horses yesterday. And one of the things the woman, she does this like, you know, equine therapy kind of stuff. So we're a group of like 4 or 5 people, and this huge horse comes in, and we're inside a barn, and she's like, make your energy like a bubble, because the horse was coming up and like trying to see if everyone had food, and like putting its nose up into your chest and face, and she's like, see if you can make your energy like a bubble and keep the horse, have a boundary with the horse. We want the horse to be in the space, but we don't want it to like step on our toe or hit us in the head with its gigantic head, like that kind of thing.
That's a really cool
practicing
example.
Taking up space. Yeah, it's really cool to see that.
It is. There is such an energetic component to it, like so much, just by being in tune with yourself of what am I available for and what am I not. And if somebody's crossing a boundary, taking responsibility to draw that boundary rather than expecting them to read your mind or blaming them for overstepping. And like, you have to be the one to uphold that boundary. And if they don't respect it, then you can leave, you can exit the situation. But it's like, we have to be willing to draw those and be clear with them. And I think a lot of times we can say like, oh, this person is really draining. But what's actually draining about it is like what we're allowing for in that situation. What are we consenting to? Maybe we need to redirect the conversation, or we need to keep our amount of time with them shorter, or we need to tell them what our needs are, what our boundaries are. Can we approach this in a different way? And
that obviously can be really challenging for some people. I think it's challenging for everyone to do it in a really connected, what's the word, like compassionate way. But to be able to say no, to be able to speak with your truth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's the loving thing to do. It like, our boundaries instruct people how to love us best. And so
we're telling other people what our needs are. I remember something I was going to say. So I love this idea of really teaching around to be able to respond rather than to react. To have choice about how we're responding, to take responsibility for ourselves. I think I shared this before on the podcast, but it's kind of like the most extreme example of this I've heard, and it was a story it was shared on a Zen retreat, and the teacher brought it up I think 2 or 3 times. Like, it kind of became like a theme on the retreat. But he was it's a story from the historical Buddha Shakyamuni, who would he would go and beg for food around noon every day and like eat this one meal according to the tradition, and not eat after that. And they would walk from village to village, like him with all his monks and nuns and whatever. And so anyway, he's going there, and as he got older and became more famous, like, people would be giving him a lot of stuff often. And he would just fill up his bowl with food, and whatever they put in it is what he would eat. And then one day they're going to a village that they've never been to before, and they knock on the door and holds out his food, begging for food. And the person looks at him and is like, I've heard about you, and he spits in his face. And then all the attendants and monks and nuns and disciples are all shocked and horrified. And then the Buddha just says thank you and turns and walks away. And then his attendant Ananda was like, how could you just leave? You're the great Buddha. And he's like, well, this man offered me a gift and I didn't accept it. So I'm going to leave it there at his doorstep.
I love that.
It's so hard to do, but I'm definitely do not do that all the time, but I like to inspire myself with that story. That it's possible to do that. And another thing about that story is like, he's doing that in front of all these people. It makes it even more difficult, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Another cool example of choice. Like, how do I want to engage this? Or how do I not want to engage it?
How do you respond? Do you give it energy or not?
Yeah, exactly.
What do you use your energy for?
Exactly.
I would say for most people, like, we can't really do that in a really authentic way, because our authentic response would probably be anger. Or we'd want to say no, and that would be a good thing to do. And if we tried to just imitate that example, this is the psychologist in me, if we tried to just imitate that example, we might be left with this charge in our nervous system where we should have said no and we didn't, and then we feel like this thing inside of ourselves that's unresolved. But I think if you were really awake, like the Buddha in that story, at least in theory, you could just have no baggage whatsoever, nothing left over from it. You're not holding anything afterwards.
Right. Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing that anger is such a demonized thing in our culture too. Because anger is really healthy, and it's part of what helps us draw boundaries, actually. It very much arises to show us a boundary needs to be drawn in a lot of circumstances. And so I think we have very few examples of what that looks like to channel anger in a healthy, effective way. And we tend to shut down around it or become offended by it.
Yeah, that's such a big topic. I think anger is so demonized, and I think if we really feel our anger authentically in the moment and express it, it's hard to trust that. But I believe that if we can do that, with this more non-dual perspective, that it's not going to come out in a destructive way. It's going to come out in a positive way. Actually, it's going to set a boundary. It's going to say no. It's something that needs to be said no to. It's going to.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it really similarly to you've maybe heard me say this before, about how male sexual energy is the element of fire, and how untamed fire burns down the world, whereas channeled fire fuels it, illuminates it, warms it.
Nice.
And so, anger is very much the element of fire. And I think when it's unchecked, when it's explosive or implosive, it can cause a lot of damage. But when it's well channeled, it can be incredible fuel, as we were saying earlier.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. I like that. Yeah, when I like to think about anger as fuel, like adding fuel to your fire.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can get clear about what that is and what your purpose is, and if your purpose is something good, then it's a good fire.
Absolutely.
You know?
Yeah, it can be super motivating.
Motivating, yeah.
Yeah.
You can see that in sports, you know, if like the athlete's getting, or the team is like getting down, and someone on the other team does something disrespectful, they can use that to motivate themselves and try to come back. And
absolutely.
Essentially, I like watching the energy flow in sports, because you'll see like things like that happen.
That's a cool example.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's another like great place to let that energy move. Yeah.
Well, so I was gonna ask you, like, you're pretty out there with what you're teaching, and it's a lot of more sensitive, taboo topics. Have you gotten a lot of shit, like people throwing stuff at you? Did anyone try to cancel you?
Yeah, a little bit. Not as much as I would have thought. It's really interesting. Every time I teach a course, I go through all these personal initiations that allow me to more deeply embody the material I'm about to teach. And it's like part of the course creation for me. And it's happened ever since this path of work chose me, or I chose it, whatever you want to call it. I think it was a two-way street, but it's a funny thing, because I think so much of my education has been through my embodied life experience. And so many things will show up in my relationship, in my sexuality, all these different kind of initiations to kind of have the firsthand experience of how to navigate something. And in some ways that gets really annoying, where I'm like, oh God, I'm like always in school in my relationship and in all these things that I'm navigating. But I learned so much from it. And then I feel like, oh, okay, I've integrated this piece. Now I know how to help somebody through this from my own personal experience. And so bringing this course through has been an edge, because people love to get pissed off about things on the internet, and people love to blame people for their perspectives and project their shit all over the place. And so that was something that I had to like really gather courage around and continue to go deeper and deeper into my sovereign expression and into my ability to trust myself. And it's been very empowering, actually. And I've had a couple people lash out on me, nothing too extreme. And, it triggers the nervous system of that whole fear of being ostracized. Yeah. And then I just remember, like, it's okay. They have their perspective. I have mine.
It's a good thing to share. It's like, it's okay.
It's okay.
People can disagree with you. People can say things.
It's okay.
Well, I see you as quite grounded, and going fairly step by step, which I think is awesome. And I think it's actually dangerous this is me now that I'm older, like looking back on my life and other people I've known, like it can be dangerous. I was gonna say, it can be dangerous to go from 0 to 100 with authenticity. Like, oh, I found my truth and here it is.
Oh yeah.
And then like all of a sudden, like, if you do get a bunch of blowback, or people don't like what you're saying, or it's fraying your relationships, if you're not grounded and resourced and have good community and have built a life from the ground up, then you could feel really alone or ostracized, like we were talking about, or you could feel shamed, or you could just be shut down, or just go or revert back to how you were really quickly, or have your own unhealthy response. Yeah,
it's a really good point. You need to be well resourced and have, I work with shaking a lot, just like how animals shake when they go through trauma, and just like moving it through my body. Like, I love dance. I love movement practices that allow me to move the energy of what I'm feeling. And so I'll work with that. But as I started coming into this work, when I first started teaching group events, I had like a handful of main fears of, what if this happens? What if this situation arises? All of them happened within like the first few events I led. And it was a great initiation into like, okay, well, now I know how to navigate that. And it was a refinement process. It helped me to be a better facilitator.
Do you want to share an example from one of them?
Let's see. So I had a couple came to one of the pujas that I offered, and they on the event, it had said, like, everyone will be working with all genders and with other people, just so that this is like the nature of the event. Everyone will be working with everyone. And then they arrived to the event and seemed seemed very, very tense. Like, and they came late, and you could tell there was something going on between them. And I spoke the guidelines to the community, and I was like, if you need to modify anything, you're welcome to. If you need help modifying anything, let me know. Please tune into your boundaries, draw them. If you don't know how to draw them, raise your hand. Like, I will support you however you need. And so I'm guiding, the event, and they're kind of looking uncomfortable and whispering a couple times, but neither of them said anything to me. And then at the end of it, when we were sharing, they chewed me out because they said, we thought we were going to get to work together, just the two of us. We came as a couple to work just with each other. And this was not at all what we were wanting, to work with other people. And I said, took a deep breath and said, well, and they were very angry. There's a lot of anger coming at me. And again, like, I think anger is a healthy expression. And I was like, okay, it's okay that you're angry. But I said, did you not feel like you could draw your boundaries when I said it's okay for anything to be modified? And did you read the description that said everyone will be working with everyone? And they denied it. They said that they didn't feel like they could. I felt like I was a scapegoat for kind of whatever they were dealing with before they came into the event.
Right.
And it didn't feel like it was mine, really. It felt like they felt disempowered in being able to create the experience that they wanted to. And the whole room was very tense. And, and then somebody finally just said, "Whoo, I feel amazing," and kind of broke the ice. And it was pretty hilarious. But, I just kind of held my center, and I was like, I actually don't need to, like, take the blame for this. I said, I'm sorry that this was your experience. And if there's anything that I could have done to help you feel more empowered in your boundaries, like, please let me know. And I do feel like I was clear in saying that, like, you are at choice throughout this experience. So, but it was cool because I got to have the experience of what it feels like to be chewed out in front of a group of people at my event, and I'm alive and I made it through. And, so
you held your center, like you're saying, which is so good.
Yeah. And it, it felt hot in my nervous system, and it was just, but I think this is one of the things that helps me do this work, is getting really comfortable being able to expand your capacity for high sensation is so key, because, and it's, again, like you said, you don't want to go from 0 to 100. You've got to, like, inch your way in and start conditioning the nervous system to be able to run large amounts of energy through it. And what does it feel like to be seen? What does it feel like to be criticized? What does it feel like for people to disagree with you? And to not, like, take that all so personally. But I think, most people really like to stay in their comfort zone. And if things start getting too high sensational, it can feel really triggering. And where I see high sensation coming into play, having a disagreement with somebody, having conflict, very high sensation. Often we want to, like, avoid it, or we explode, or we go into people pleasing. We can freeze. One of those, like, fight, flight, freeze, or fawn responses will come through. In high amounts of sexual pleasure, there can be that tendency for the energy to want to, like, eject from the body, and it can be an edge to say, like, can I breathe with this and move it through my body and start, moving towards some of these realms of, like, full body orgasm, or, like, moving it through the entire body, rather than saying, whoa, this is really intense, I'm just going to shoot it out in an ejaculation or an explosive orgasm right away. And there's nothing wrong with that if you do want to do it, but, like, what does it feel like to actually move that sensation through your body? It's a great way to condition your nervous system to hold large amounts of sensation. And money, I think, is another one. Investing, like, a high amount, asking for a high amount, having a high amount in your savings account. Sometimes people will kind of hit an unconscious threshold and then, like, blow their load, go spend a bunch of money on something, or manifest some sort of expense unconsciously to keep them below that amount that's kind of too much to hold. So
you've seen that with people you're working with?
Absolutely. And like, I've seen it within myself.
It's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. It was uncomfortable for me to, like, ask for the price that I value my work at for a while. It was uncomfortable to invest in people I wanted to work with that had a high price. These sort of things all across the board, conflict, money, sexual energy, they're all great ways to expand that capacity for high sensation and to stay with it, to breathe through it, not to repress it, not to avoid it. And that's been really, really huge for me in this process of stepping into this work and recognizing not everyone's going to like me. I am not for everyone at all. I mean, I lose a chunk of followers every bold post that I make. And I say, cool, like my following just got more refined. I love it. It means like those people weren't in resonance. That's great. Like, awesome, go where you are. And now like I'm speaking to a group of people that are deeper in resonance with me each time that I post, because people will choose to walk away if they don't like what I say. And it's not a problem,
Yeah.
It's not my responsibility. I don't have to fix it. I don't have to worry about it. That's their sovereign choice, and I'm going to keep doing my thing.
Yeah, it's a good attitude, yeah. Phew, yeah, you just shared a lot. Well, like, one thing that you're naming is like high sensation, and to be with it, whether it's uncomfortable or even pleasure or even the energetic component of money, but to that, we're tracking that in our body. It's like, so staying embodied, staying present with your body can be such a powerful way to work with conflict or difficult situations, because at that level, it is just sensation.
Yeah.
So if you can connect to that level of things.
Absolutely. And paying attention to what stories are you making about the sensation.
Right.
That's an interesting thing. And when like you said, it's just sensation. So when you can breathe with that and you have practices to ground and to move it through, and you don't get so wrapped up in the story, you start to train yourself to be with it, and it gets a little more comfortable each time.
Yeah, yeah. It's good. It's good to be reflective and not use these things to try to become like a shield of armor. Like, it doesn't matter what anyone else says, because I'm my own sovereign individual. Like that would be not a good way to go. Right?
Totally.
You want to be able to take in feedback or like see, okay, maybe I was wrong there, or maybe I didn't say
Exactly. I like how you said that, because part of it is welcoming disagreeing viewpoints, and that's something I really encourage with my clients and students. Like, I am nobody's guru. Like, I'm always like, you are your number one guru. Take what resonates, leave the rest. Also, if you notice you have resistance to something I say, like, try it on. Notice what the resistance is about. Maybe it's actually really good medicine for you. Maybe it's not your thing. Either one is okay. What I really care about in the work I do with people and in this course is helping people come home to their sovereign truth, even if that looks 100% different than mine. I don't care how it manifests. I care about helping people feel really solid in what their truth is, and respecting that, and being able to engage with other people who express that differently.
Beautiful. Yeah. I love that.
So I think that's key.
Well, I'm thinking back, if someone's listening or watching and you're describing this couple at your workshop, like, what kinds of things are happening in your workshop? Because someone who's not familiar with the work you do might be imagining things that are beyond what is actually happening.
That's really funny that you brought that up. So this was a workshop. I mean, it was just, there was different things of like eye contact and breath work exercises, heart sharing, like vulnerability exercises. There was no sexual contact or nudity involved. All very like platonic intimacy.
No, it's worth sharing, because when people hear the word tantra and sex and all this stuff you're talking about, their imagination goes to
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm something I have been complimented on very often is that I create a very safe space. But ultimately, like, I almost don't even like to call it a safe space, because like, nothing is really truly safe ever. Like, anything could happen at any point. And I do think that when we're pushing our edges, we have to realize like something really uncomfortable might happen. And we have to try to take responsibility for holding our boundaries and listening to our bodies as much as possible. And that doesn't mean that we're immune to somebody violating us or doing something that makes us uncomfortable. But it does set us up to prevent that to a much greater extent when we are listening to ourselves, when we're grounded in our bodies, when we're trusting ourselves. So like, in the same way that I was speaking to how my energy field, I'm much more clear on what I'm available for and what I'm not. And I don't really get approached by men in unwanted ways. It doesn't mean that like I'm invincible and that nothing could ever happen in that way. But from my own personal experience, I do not attract any of that anymore. And so I've just seen it to be very impactful. And I think when you go to an event like that, you have to say like, okay, I need to get clear with myself on what my boundaries are and how to express those, and not hold other people accountable if I'm not being clear and communicating what I need.
Yeah. I can see how it could be frustrating to, like, if someone doesn't have good boundaries and they show up to an event where you're wanting to not focus for 2 hours on creating boundaries for yourself, So do you have a process of I mean, I guess you create a description and you just kind of trust the people that come, but.
So, in my, I tend to say, like, who this is for, who this isn't for. I like offering some practices to help around boundaries, but I've gotten better at being really descript in my, course pages or whatever. The one that's coming up, I say this one's not for the easily offended or the faint of heart. I don't want...
Because of the radical self-responsibility part.
Yeah, I'm not interested in having this be like some huge thing where everyone's like super offended and making attacks on each other and being like overly sensitive. Like, I want us to be able to have a grounded, mature conversation about some difficult topics. Doesn't mean you won't get triggered. Doesn't mean you won't have a charge around it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with me at all. But what I'm asking for in this course is that people already come with a commitment to self-responsibility and taking care of their needs and having resources that, like, if this is really intense for me emotionally, I have ways to tend to myself. And I'm not coming to this course thinking that it's group therapy, because it's not. So I think that's part of like my work with boundaries, is sharing, like, here's what I'm offering, here's what I'm not offering.
Make a clear description.
Absolutely.
So people know what they're getting into. So
that's been a big refinement process for me. So, like, that couple, they were a great teacher to me, because I got to see, like, where maybe I wasn't clear enough. Maybe I needed to ask, like, does everybody feel comfortable working with other people? Does everybody feel comfortable knowing how to assert their boundaries? Maybe I should have checked in with them and said, hey, you guys are looking a little uncomfortable. Is there anything you need? So there was all kinds of places. And I think, so speaking to what you said earlier of not putting a shield up against people, this is a really good example. Like, you can come into that space of, like, being centered in your truth and saying, I'm not going to take on, like, what people are throwing at me, but I can also, like, look at it and take responsibility for where could I do that differently next time? What was my piece in this? What can I learn from this? How are these people my teacher? And I think that's one of the biggest pieces of this non-dual perspective that I love, is seeing that people that have a different perspective can be an amazing teacher in a way. People that you think are your opponents can be helping you actually see where your blind spots are and become more solid in your truth and come to know yourself on a deeper level. Yeah,
I really appreciate how you're speaking to that. And to take the perspective of learning. If we're all learning together, then it puts it in this perspective where it's okay. Like, okay, you got upset, but we're learning from this. Rather than this, like, polarizing into, like, the victim perpetrator whole kind of thing. I will say that I'm not saying this about your workshops or what you do, but I've led workshops in different ways and at festivals and things, and I've seen how if you're in a group of people doing an exercise together, it actually is pretty hard to say no to that. And so when I teach a workshop now, at the beginning, I make a point to really emphasize that you actually can not do anything that I'm suggesting or leading. It's totally fine. You could step to the side, you can come back in, you could leave, you can go out the door. Like, I won't be... I'll be curious of what's going on with you if you just leave, but I'm not going to stop you. It's totally fine if that's what you need.
Right.
And so I really think that's important. I think at some of the festival spaces and stuff, that's totally lost. And people are doing things that they don't actually want to do because they're in this group energy.
Yeah.
And they're worried about how they look, or they're just going with it, or they're just,
That's a really good point. Yeah, and I think it's awesome to empower people that, like, it's okay to go against the grain. Like, if you're not feeling what's going on here, awesome. Like, you don't have to go along with it. Yeah. And that is something that I've learned from, like, anybody who ever has had an upset at an event. It really highlights to me where can I create a more clear container. So again, it's not like I'm taking responsibility for those people's, if whether it was a lack of boundaries or whether it was, whatever it is, but I am taking responsibility for where can I support people to feel more deeply empowered in the containers that I create.
Beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. And so I think we can always be learning from those kinds of situations. And if we're unwilling to feel them, we miss those opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're in a group and you end up doing something that you don't feel great about afterwards, or that maybe you weren't 100% a yes for, you can learn from that. Because there's nothing more human than being taken over by some group dynamic, right? That's what happens. That's why we have riots and all kinds of crazy things happening.
Absolutely.
People kind of lose their minds sometimes in a group.
That's so true. That's a big piece of why I'm teaching this right now too. I just notice a lot of lot of us versus them mentality, a lot of bandwagon, like mob mentality stuff. And it's easy to get lost in, and it will be the demise of our species if we don't get a handle on it. Like, we have to learn how to work together even if we see things differently. We have to learn to stop acting like the other side, quote unquote, is like the problem, the demon, the scum of the earth. It's like there's, and I think that's one of the helpful perspectives on non-duality. And there's two sides to this, right? Because like you could be like, oh, everything's one, so like there's no right or wrong, and I don't have to have any boundaries, and blah blah blah, everyone can be forgiven for everything. I mean, you could take that perspective. It's not going to be super grounded in the human experience, but you can take them both together and say like, okay, like if I feel like I'm right and that they're wrong, like they probably see it the opposite. They probably see that they're right and I'm wrong. And can we like move beyond that dynamic and try understanding the other side and having compassion for the other side and getting curious about where are they coming from? Even when somebody does something really horrible, can we get curious for like, where is that coming from, and start addressing where are the wounds that need to be addressed, rather than like all the blame and shame and finger pointing that doesn't actually get us anywhere. It just keeps us looping. So I think there's both. It's like acknowledging that we're having a human experience. We have emotions. People do awful things to each other, and we need to feel the pain of that. And sometimes, like, it's not about, like, forgiving somebody and working it out. Sometimes it's about drawing that boundary and saying, like, I'm done. But sometimes it is about, like, recognizing that right and wrong can be two sides of the same coin. And can we see, like, where we can agree, or where we can at least just witness and recognize each other's humanity, instead of spinning out into this whole, the other side is the problem and deserves this, that, and the other.
Yeah, I can agree more. It's good work. It's subtle. It's like, I mean, all the social media and politics and all that stuff, it's intense to even suggest taking some of what we're talking about here and applying it to the more collective becomes like really loaded. Because so when you talk about victimization and you bring in something like racism or sexism or whatever, it's like a huge thing. But talking to you today, it's like I come back to that both and. It's like, yes, racism is real and there's problems, and you still get to respond individually. Right. And you get to choose how you're responding.
I completely agree. And it's, and I, with that both and, like, I don't know that there is any one size fits all rule to anything. It's like when you look at people who are, victimized as children or by force, it's like, self-responsibility is kind of a different topic there. It's like, sometimes we don't have choice, and sometimes like that's taken away in really horrible ways. And I also want to clarify that like self-responsibility never means that we deserved something or that we caused it. It can mean that we caused it. Sometimes we can look at something and be like, oh wow, I really brought this into my life by acting in this way, or by not doing this or whatever. But it's not about blame. It's not about like saying I deserved this or I created this. It's about saying like, how can I respond to this now? My ability to respond to the situation to move forward. And I think that's a really important distinction, is that like none of what I'm saying is intended to victim blame or victim shame at all. And it's definitely not to say there's no victims. But just especially like in the Western world, or like as people that do have more privilege, where can we exercise that privilege and that power of choice to reclaim our sovereignty and to stop feeding narratives that we feel like we're a victim of? Because I see a lot of that, of people like people complaining about the 1% and the rich and environmental degradation, but they sit at home and order everything on Amazon, while meanwhile like their local small businesses are going out of business. Or people saying they hate the government and they're freaking out about the economy, but then like during COVID, they felt like it was really nice to keep collecting unemployment instead of getting a job. And of course, lots of people did need unemployment, but I know people who went and traveled on that unemployment instead. And then like now, it's like restaurants are going out of business because they can't get anyone to work. And so like just recognizing, where am I playing a part? Like, how are my day-to-day decisions contributing to Environmental degradation. Am I voting with my dollar? Is my money going towards corporations that I don't believe in, or is it going towards businesses I do want to support? And again, like, not everybody has that choice as much. Some people have to shop where they shop because it's what they have the money for. Some people say they don't have the money to make, ethical decisions with their money, but it's that they're valuing putting their money towards other things. So it's just a question of, like, what are your values? And, like, how are you playing into the story? And that's everybody's choice to make. There's no, like, I don't mean this in a dogmatic or a should way, but I mean, like, is what you're saying about the world, is what you're worrying about the world, is that congruent with, like, the actions that you're taking? And are you feeding narratives unconsciously that you don't want to be feeding, and you have a choice that you can make elsewhere?
Yeah. I like that. I think it's important. I try to do that myself, of course. I think we all do, but
and none of us are perfect. Not at all.
I used to be, I've read something about you where like this too, like really into environmentalism and, so passionate about taking care of the environment and then trying to make my personal choices line up with that, which is not easy. Like, I respect people who are doing that in a good way. But, the other move you can make mentally is, like, it's not my individual responsibility to, I'm not responsible for Amazon. Like, I make a choice here and there, but I don't know, like, it's just to, like, honor our individual choices, but not use that to something to beat ourselves up about, or
exactly.
Even though, like, it does matter, but it's not you're not going to change climate change as an individual, right? Like, right.
But if everybody says, like, it can't be me, it has to be the collective, then we also give up the little droplets that make the whole ocean,
Yeah.
So it's both. It's both. And it's like, of course, a lot of the corporations are, like, creating a lot more damage than any of us are as individuals in that respect.
Right.
But we can say it's all their fault, so I'm not going to do anything about it. Or we can say, like, what are the choices I can make? And of course, not beating ourselves up about it. There's no shame, but just getting honest about where am I being complacent. I think that we live in a culture that is addicted to comfort and convenience.
Convenience, right? Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah.
And like, to me, I can't stand the notion of disposable anything. I think it's the most ridiculous thing that humans ever did. And so just looking at, like, where can I reduce that? Because that's something that matters to me. That might not matter as much to somebody else, but, like, where are the things that you notice matter that maybe you just get complacent around because it's easier? And if you're really worried about the planet, then, like, what can you do from, like, your perspective? Because I do believe that there's a reflection between the internal and the external, and, like, the beliefs we hold and the thoughts we have and the actions we take. All of that gets projected and reflected back to us, and it is a two-way street. It's like there's all this stuff coming towards us that we can't control, and how we respond to it makes a difference as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, environment's a big one.
It's a huge one. Yeah, my background is in environmental studies, and it's and so it was a heavy one for me. Like what you're saying, we cannot, like, spin ourselves out into this place of stress and shame. I did that for years. I was like a hardcore environmental activist. I was an intern for the Sierra Club trying to shut down a coal plant in Oregon, and I felt like I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders, and I would be, like, in a puddle of tears every day when, like, the oil spill happened and this happened and that. I mean, it was like, it was so heavy. And I came across a quote on the inside of a porta potty at a festival one day while on a medicine journey. And it was the Rumi quote, "Yesterday I was clever, so I wanted to change the world. Today I'm wise, so I'm changing myself." And for me, that was, like, the huge light bulb moment, because I was constantly trying to change everyone else. I was a hardcore vegetarian at the time, trying to tell everyone else why they should be a vegetarian. I was canvassing on people's doors. And not to say that canvassing and rallying and all these things can't be useful and don't have their place, but I needed to change my relationship with the chaos of the world and with, like, my daily existence. I literally had so much guilt for, like, using toilet paper. I was, like, so neurotic about sustainability, and that wasn't healthy. Like, I was drowning in that. And so now, like, that's not how I live. But, like, my partner, hunts deer and elk, and we carve up our own meat, we grow food. He has a mushroom farm. Like, we do what we can without it being something that is like overly stressful and swallowing our lives.
No, that's awesome. I think you do a lot more than a lot of people. So.
Yeah, and it's, it's just like...
You make a conscious effort, for example, not to get a disposable coffee cup or whatever it is.
Totally. Yeah. There's little things we can all do, and so it's finding, like, where is your edge, where you can just push that edge in a way that feels healthy and not overwhelming. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, so you mentioned your partner. How long have you been together?
We've been together almost 5 years this time around. Oh. We were together in our early 20s for 9 months. And then he broke my heart. We went separate ways, and we were apart for 4 years. And then we both had like other long-term relationships during that time, had some falling outs. Like, we were not close during that time. And we synchronistically came back together 4 years to the day of when we had broken up. Just happened to be in the same city. Yeah. Oh, I know. It was pretty wild. So yeah, we've been together almost 5 years this time around. Beautiful. Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking, like, in terms of what you're teaching and offering, around sexuality and what, but you're someone who's in a committed relationship. It seems like relevant to share. And but there's no, maybe, different people can take different paths through life, but it's not.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's one of my biggest teachers with all of this. Like I said, so many of the lessons show up in my relationship and in my own body and in my own sexuality. I mean, I think that's another thing that these health issues have taught me a lot about, is that when the body is not healthy, sexual energy doesn't always flow in the way that we want it to. And I think a lot of times we can... and not even just when the body is not healthy. Like, let me say this. So if I am overworked, I'm going to feel that in my sexual energy. My sexual energy is going to be depleted, and that's a signal for my body that I'm not in balance. And so one thing I work on with people a lot is, like, people will get really angry at their bodies of like, oh, I'm not hard when I'm supposed to be. I'm not lasting long enough. I can't get wet. I'm having pain during sex. And there's like this expectation of the body to behave in a certain way. But almost all of these situations are, there's something being reflected. The body is communicating something that's out of alignment, out of balance, needs to be addressed, needs to be listened to. And sexual energy flows much better when we talk with it rather than at it. So if we're saying, like, why is my body not showing up in this way? And we're getting mad about it rather than getting curious, saying, what's this about? What do I need? Maybe I'm not being present. Maybe I don't trust my partner. Maybe we're moving too quickly. Maybe there needs to be better communication. There's all kinds of things that can play into that. And that's one of the things that I've gotten to learn firsthand a lot, is like my sexual energy hasn't always flowed perfectly by any means. And so, like, I feel like since choosing this path, all these different hiccups will come up for me to like take a deeper look and say, like, what's actually going on? Where am I out of alignment? So we, again, like, the obstacle is the way, as I believe it's Ryan Holiday. He wrote a book called The Obstacle is the Way. And I love that title, because it's like, that is the pathway to deeper understanding and growth.
Well, this is a big topic, so we don't have to talk about it a lot, but I was going to ask you if you have any thoughts on, like, polyamory versus monogamy. And I think that's a big thing. I mean, I'm guessing you get asked that a lot, right?
It is a big topic, yeah. I think there's no one-size-fits-all approach at all, and I think we're very conditioned to be monogamous, and so I think there are a lot of people that would like to explore polyamory, or that monogamy doesn't work so well for, but they're so deeply entrenched in monogamous conditioning that it can be really hard to know how to practice that. I think we've been steeped in monogamous conditioning for a really long time, and I think for some people monogamy works amazingly. For some people polyamory works a lot better. 2 of the healthiest relationships I've ever seen are polyamorous, and I know a lot of healthy monogamous relationships too, and I think a lot of times, like, people can give one or the other a bad rap and, like, blame the relationship dynamic for certain problems. But I think either one is going to require deep honesty and authenticity and transparency and the ability to work on yourself for it to flow smoothly. And I think a lot of the same principles kind of apply across the board.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably fair.
Yeah.
Kind of normalize it, and a lot of the same underlying principles, and to be authentic and honest, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One's not necessarily better than the other. Maybe our culture, at least parts of it, are moving to more of an acceptance of different possibilities and arrangements. And
I think that's what gets problematic, is when people think that they have to do it a certain way.
Right.
And like for a long time, a lot of people didn't know that polyamory was an option. And so they were like cheating or couldn't, stay in a relationship. And then they realized that like actually nothing's wrong with them. That's just what works for them better. And so, and I think it's possible to use either form of relationship as like a crutch as well. Like I think people can try to source their sense of self-worth in another person. And that's something to be aware of too. I think like I'll hear a lot of people say like, oh, anyone who's polyamorous just doesn't know how to like do the work with somebody. And so they want to like bounce around between partners. I think that's true for some people. I think a lot of people absolutely know how to show up and do the work with multiple people. But people, like serial monogamists can do the same thing.
Right.
Like, they can be looking for their next relationship before they feel comfortable ending the current one. And so we have to look at like, what does relationship mean to us? Why do I want to be in a relationship? What's the intention behind it?
Yeah. I like what you said about sourcing your self-worth in another person.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, can you be alone too?
Back to that.
Back to that.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of people just don't know how to be alone. And so sometimes they'll even settle for something that doesn't feel so good, and things will stagnate. Or they'll have multiple partners because one's not enough. And so it's just, again, just looking at yourself, like, what is relationship about for me? What do I want? What do I want to give to it? What do I want from it?
And sharing that with others, like being honest and open with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it brings me back to that saying, I've probably heard this a million times, but like to be able to be in a relationship with yourself in a positive way and then with others, and that just makes so much sense to me now.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's everything. And we'll learn how to be in better relationship with ourselves through relationship as well. So it goes both ways. It's always both ways, right? But I think there's people who have been alone too much, and then relationships really hard for them. So a good balance is key, and I really encourage couples to take lots of alone time while they are in relationship. Otherwise things can get too saturated, too stagnant. Polarity is really dependent upon a sense of otherness, and
that's a good point.
Being able to like each maintain your own opposite charge and staying true to your individuality. Because when you're attracted to somebody, when you first get that attraction to them, it's because of who they are as an individual, not because of who they are in reference to you. So then if we start melting into one another in relationship and becoming way too enmeshed, all of a sudden neither of us are the person with that same individual charge that we were first attracted to begin with.
Yeah.
And so we can start to diminish that polarity, and that's where people can get antsy or bored or whatever.
Something feels a little off and not right, and Totally. I guess my thought, I know we've been talking for a while, but just that wherever someone is in their life, in relationship or not, like to appreciate that and to wake up to that, like it's not bad. To feel shame around it, and I think that shame like can block us from actually doing the work that we need to do in a particular situation.
Absolutely. I think shame is like the biggest thing in the way to just self-love and growth. I think like as much as we can take shame out of anything, it's going to be a lot easier to move forward. But any like point in our life, any relationship that we're in, like it all offers its own purpose. And so being able to, like sometimes when people are in a relationship for a long time, they miss being single. And when they're single, they miss being in relationship and like enjoy what you have while you have it and make the most of it.
That's a good goal. Good message.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. We covered a lot of ground today.
That's a good one.
Thank you so much for having me.
Be a resource for people.
It was really fun to talk with you. I really appreciate you bringing all these awesome topics and like getting into some of the uncomfortable stuff with me. It's where I love to go. So.
And I'll link your course and your website in the show notes.
Awesome. The course starts on November 13th. And actually, if you want, I can throw in a discount code for the people on your podcast.
Oh, cool.
Listening.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Cool. Yeah, we'll do 15% off, and we'll call it State of Mind.
Okay. If you use that, we'll know that you made it to the end of this conversation.
That's your reward for making it through all the discomfort. Way to expand your capacity for sensation.
Exactly. Thanks.